In this presentation, we will talk about branding with regards to our online business. Get ready for business, online business. Branding is another area you can spend a lifetime studying. However, most people, when they start their business, want to know what are the essentials I need to know in order to start the business, in order to start moving forward with it. Are there some things that are going to be consistent with regards to the recommendations? Those are the things we're going to be focusing in on here. Now, note that I'm not a professional marketer here. I'm someone who has an online business, and the thing my profession is accounting. So I'm taking that, I'm putting that into my online business. That's the perspective I'm coming from. Now, I have done a lot of research in terms of branding and looked into, what people think in terms of branding as you're marketing things like courses and other online resources. So this will be my perspective on it. One key thing that I have seen is consistency. So what you want is to set something up that's going to be consistent. Now, as you think about the consistency, we want to think of it in relation to our end goal. So we got to think of our business plan here. Here's our basic business model. The idea here is to be driving things to our website. The idea is to drive traffic to the website. So we want people to be able to recognize certain things that we have out there that's goal is to drive to the website. So if we're making things like YouTube videos or posts and whatnot on social media, the goal is to have those things to be recognized so that they can pull people into the website. So that's going to be the objective. Everything is going to focus around here. So you want to design your website in such a way that it's recognizable, it stands out, doesn't have to be super fancy or anything. Actually, simple can be better. Simple but recognizable. Recognizable because it's simple, And then you've got these other types of things that should be recognizable to pull people into the website. Now, note that you could have some exceptions with regards to your consistency, and I'll talk a little bit about them later. But just note that once you get this basic model going, you might work on platforms outside of your website. In other words, you might have instructional courses that you have in some way or some other resources on your website or services that you provide here, and you may work somewhere else and do something else in other places. In other words, you might have like a Udemy platform. So you have to think about, are you driving traffic to the website or are you driving traffic to the Udemy platform? Because then you have a split goal, and that could affect your branding to some degree as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but right now you want to keep your focus basically on your end result, and that's going to be the website. All these types of things are going to be pointing to then the website, and therefore you want consistency on it. Now, if your website is then pointing to Udemy, if the ultimate goal is to be going to Udemy for courses or something like that, if that's the thing you're selling, then you want the consistency there as well. However, if your website is pointing to like a Thinkific website, or if it's pointing to a Skillshare, Skillshare or a Teachable website, one that you own, that you're doing the own marketing for, then Udemy might be something that you're relying on them to do their own marketing for. So we might have a difference in that case. So I'll talk a little bit about that later here. But here, main focus, website. Okay, so what do we need to, some of the major topics that you got to think about, of course, when you're trying to think of consistency. One is the name. What am I going to name this thing? Now, most of the time, your name is the name that you're going to basically be wanting to drive. And that's usually the way that small businesses can build up really quickly. And that's because people have a more personal feel to it. These are my perspectives as to why this is the case. People have a more personal feel to it, and if you're able to market on things like social media, even something like a YouTube or something like that, the platforms, at least originally, were designed for that type of personal interaction. It's designed for one-to-one kind of interaction, and so that also really works well with the platforms. Now, I do think a lot of the platforms are moving away from that. You'll notice in that they're allowing branding. They're seeing that branding, things that, pages that aren't an actual name, aren't one individual or saying one name, there's a market for that. So for example, YouTube, you can have a brand station, right? You can have your station and then a brand station. So they're recognizing that not all YouTube channels is just going to be one name. So then you have to decide, do you want to have your name or do you want to have some other name that you're going to be putting in place on that? You could see that with Facebook as well, having a business page. So the business page is going to be separate. So if the business page is separate, it could still be your name or it could be something different. Now, in my profession, in accounting, most accounting firms are someone's name. And one of the reasons it's somebody's name oftentimes is because they are licensed, right? If you have a license, and that's one of the things that could be a factor, right? If you are starting a page and it's something that's professional and you have some kind of licensing for it, then it's nice to be able to say, this is, my name and CPA or something, whatever your credentials are on it. And that's another area that can lend credibility just in the name. But you can see it also causes problems, because you'll also note if you look at the history of CPA firms, it's kind of a mess, because you got the original partners, it was one person, this Smith CPA, and then Smith CPA merged with Adams CPA, and now it's Smith and Adams CPA firm, and then Smith Adams and Johnson over here merged together. And then Smith died, but Smith was so important that we're not going to get rid of Smith's name. So now it's Adam Johnson, and Smith is still there, and we got a new partner, but we don't put his partner name on the name of the partnership because it would be too long. It gets to be a mess, right? And the same thing can happen with regards to the name of a channel too. Just note that if you have a business and your ultimate goal is to grow the business, and you're gonna basically, so for example, if you're gonna have courses and you're thinking maybe at some point, at some day, I'm gonna have courses on my own platform, and then maybe I'll merge with other people and I'll have other people join my platform. Well, if they join your platform and you just have your name as the name of the platform, then it might be a little bit more difficult to negotiate how that's actually going to work. When people go to your platform and it says, Joe Smith, and then you have courses from all these other different people, it could be a little bit more confusing. If you were to have a generic name, such as this is, some generic name, this is what we do, whatever the name may be, or some creative name, inspiring name, or something like that, then as you merge, it'll be easier. And if you ever wanted to sell the platform, then you can do that more easily too. I mean, if I have my platform, it's just like it's like a kind of a CPA firm. If my CPA firm is named, my name CPA, and I try to sell that to somebody else, well, the brand name, the name recognition is pretty much attached to me, so it's a little bit more difficult to negotiate with mergers and sales and stuff like that in the long run. So those are the two things you want to kind of balance out. If you start with your name, I think that's going to be the easiest way to build. I still think the platforms are kind of geared towards that, towards a name one-on-one kind of connection, although they're veering away from that. But in the long term, at some point, you might get to some point where that's going to be detrimental if you want to merge together and you end up with this kind of problem, or if you want to sell some component. Now, also note that when you're thinking about these things, you can kind of agonize over the pros and cons of these different directions that you can take. You can change these over time. Even businesses change these over time. Obviously, like I say, the CPA firms change, partners' names, and that's okay. So it's not totally set in stone. However, you don't want to be changing all the time. So the better of a decision you can make up front, the better you are, because then you can be consistent for a longer period of time. And really, for most people, if you're really going to do this, it's a game. It's not a short sprint. You're not going to get anywhere in a short sprint. It's more of a marathon type of thing. You're building stuff up over a longer period of time, and consistency is going to be easier to do that with. The next thing you can think about is your logo. So that's going to be something that's going to be recognized, and this is something that you could put on basically all of your sites, your social media, your YouTube, and then wherever you're driving the website. And remember, the end goal, always in your mind, the end goal is the website. So you want the other things to be tying into that. So you could then pick you again. So that could be, and this could be a picture of actual you, right? Or you can pick something else, like some type of logo, which doesn't have to be a face or anything. It could be anything, any kind of logo that just people see that and they say, oh, I'm tying that, I link that to whatever it is I'm looking at, right? So the logo could be anything, Honey Nut Cheerios is a bee, right? It just happens to be a bee, all right? Or a bear for something, right? It just has to be something that if people have seen enough that they're tying it to your stuff. And so that's going to be, and you just want to be consistent with the logo. So again, if the logo is you, in other words, if you take your actual photograph, if you take, and this would be something that would be completely natural, if your style of video presentation is face shots, right? Then it would be completely natural to make that your logo. And then that would be something that you can have consistency over the time. And again, I think that's a really good way to grow. I think people that do that typically grow faster. If you had two channels at the same time, I haven't tested this, but you probably find people that have tested it. If you have two channels that are exactly the same and one, use the face shots, then I think they would, and then they can build that personal relationship. I think they would grow faster. But again, you do have some drawbacks, as well. So it's not, you have to decide which way you want to go, and it really depends on your style of what you're doing and what you're trying to do with it as well. But again, whatever you pick, you'd like to have consistency. If your logo's a bear today and it's a cat tomorrow or something like that, people aren't going to be able to tie the logo to the video presentations, and or whatever it is you're offering, and that's what you want to get. You want to be able to tie this out. Also note, I just want to point out that when you're using the name and like your face as a logo, if as you do grow, like this is in my, it always reminds me of Martha Stewart was a company that grew up obvious around Martha Stewart. And I always thought that was interesting because she was, had investors and was doing all, just huge company that was growing around just, one person doing stuff. And I also just kind of felt like at that time, that's a lot of pressure. It seemed like a lot of pressure for one individual, because obviously if that one individual has a problem, which probably is the reason this stuck in my mind, because there was a problem, right? She had some kind of issue with stock trades or whatever. I can't remember the whole thing, but that just killed the whole company, because the whole company is tied to her name, right? So again, I think when she grew the company, to me, I think it was a lot easier for her to do so, because the whole company is built around her and her personality, and it wouldn't have been able to grow. But at the same time, once it's to a certain size, it seems like a lot of pressure on one individual when the entire company is based on them as the name and the logo. And again, it's the company is valued at this certain value, but you can't transfer that value to anybody else unless that person, the logo, the actual goes with it. Which I think is it's just an interesting thing to think about. So where do you want to be now? How fast do you want to grow? Where do you want this actually to be later on? Is something worth pondering as you go through the growth point. And then you want to think about like thumbnails. Thumbnails is always this big thing. Like these are going to be the slide, the first picture on the slide. You may want consistency with every slide you have if you do slides like PowerPoints, or some consistency with everything you do. Again, obviously, if it's your face, if you have your face in it, that'll be a way to make it consistent. But the thumbnail is the lead-in. And so, for example, for me, obviously, I just started doing this at some point. I'm not saying it's a great looking thing or anything like that, but I've just been doing this as the intro slide. And so if you see these colors, then most people will probably tie it out. I've also then just started, I made these little characters and I started putting them in there. They're not good. They're not like, I'm an accountant, but that they have some consistency, and then some consistency with like a logo. Again, I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. Most of my instructional videos I started with teaching for courses, so I wasn't really thinking about logos and this kind of stuff. I was just putting stuff in there. So I'm not a marketer. I don't know how to make I'm not a professional on making the best logo or anything, but I do know that consistency is something that's always going to be there. Now, when you're on your intro slides on your thumbnails, then you probably it doesn't have to be like this blue and green up top. It could be on the side that you got the blue and green, or something that runs along the bottom. You want something that you can basically put in every thumbnail that won't impede you from then putting whatever else you want to put in there, such as text, such as whatever else. So in other words, if you don't do that, if all your thumbnails are completely different and you just put some big image in it, or just some big words, then people, it might grab people's attention, but it's a one-off thing. They're watching that, but they're not, the brand isn't sinking into their mind, right? It's just this one cool video of this one thumbnail that attracted them to it. Whereas if you can come up with a cool thing that people tend to want to click on, that's consistent or whatever, that would be the way to go. And even if you have something that's not so fancy, or something a little more boring, if it's more consistent, then again, I think what you're really looking for is that consistency of the brand. So that's what you're looking for. So that would include, something like the color that you're going to have in it, possibly the logo on each slide somewhere. This is all stuff that takes up room, however. So you got to think, again, you want to think of it so it doesn't in such a way so it doesn't, take up the whole slide. And then something like some other kind of images or some characters that maybe tie to you. These are just some ideas. You could probably do better with the actual characters and the logo and the theme here, but that's the general idea. Now, I just do want to point out that remember the goal here is to be driving things to your website. So your website might be, for example, if you do courses after a while, or also if you think about if you're working on something like a website that would be Upwork or something like that, then again, maybe you're not trying to drive people to Upwork, because the goal here is to be Upwork to be the job that they're driving you traffic. If you're thinking about Upwork, then they're the one. So if I think of our model over here, if we're over here, these big platforms, I'm not trying to drive traffic to them, right? The reason I'm working with these big platforms is because they drive traffic to themselves. And I'm going to work with them. I'm not going to try to steal their traffic. I'm going to work with them within their rules and be just content that they're driving traffic and they don't pay as much because they spend a lot on advertising, and that's fine. And the traffic that I'm driving, I'm trying to drive to the website up here, right? Now, if you're making courses and the only courses you have are on Udemy, which is a big platform, then you could be driving your traffic to something like a Udemy. But if your website is geared towards consulting or something like that, then you do consulting and maybe Udemy. And then at some point, if you were to branch out to your own teaching platform, then you probably aren't driving traffic to Udemy anymore, because the point of having Udemy is the fact that you don't need to drive traffic there. They drive, I mean, as far as my experience with Udemy, they drive far more traffic to my courses than I can. I can't. That's the point. That's why you go on Udemy, because they drive traffic. So the traffic that I would drive, then you would think would be going to somewhere else. So that means that you may not want at that point consistency on Udemy. You don't really need it there, because your goal for the website is to drive traffic to whatever you're doing, consulting, or your products and services and whatnot. So just remember, so if we go down to the platforms down here, at some point, if you're teaching courses, you may be using like a Thinkific platform, a Teachable platform, or a WordPress platform. Those would be yours, that you own, that are your platforms. These platforms over here are platforms that are owned by somebody else. And the reason you work with these platforms over here is typically because they do their own marketing and they do it really well, but they take a lot of the money to do that, right? Because they're paying the marketers. So you may then want to over here actually not be doing the exact same marketing. You might want to use different thumbnails on these items. It's just up to you. You could use the same ones. It probably won't matter, but it's not as important, right? Over here, you might want to say, I'm using different thumbnails. I'm going to use, a different name or something like that. And also note that if you're teaching on a Udemy or something like that, then, or most of these platforms, they want your teaching name, obviously. Whereas if you're over here, you could say, this is my platform name, right? This is my platform name, and then I can name the instructors under it. Whereas over here, you're on Udemy as an instructor. So it's geared towards putting your instructor name on it. And again, if you were to do that, then that can lead towards your credentials as well. So the overarching theme here is that you'd like to decide this as soon as possible, and then apply consistency. Apply consistency across the website, across the YouTube, across the social media platforms as much as possible to just, put that brand out there that starts to sink in people's minds, and the goal, once again, driving people to the website.